Hello, and welcome to the Rossaround Backstage podcast, talking with artists, technicians, musicians, producers, directors, and all the interesting and talented people that make it all happen for you. Well, hello, everybody. This is Ross Pallone with the Rossaround Backstage podcast, and I'm here today with my old friend, percussionist Brian Kilgore, who has played on hundreds, probably thousands of gold records, movie scores, TV scores, and Grammy Award-winning records as a percussionist. And he's going to tell us today about how he got into the business and what he's currently doing now, and little bits and pieces about this great music business that we are in. So, Brian, I want to ask you the first and main question of the day, and that is, how did you get into this business?
Well, that's a good story. It all kind of, for me, it goes back to the initial spark of what really hooked me, and that would be in seventh grade. I signed up for, actually, let me go back even a little further. My sixth grade class, we did a camp out in Yosemite for 1 week, and when I came home, my parents had gone to dinner with some friends of theirs that their son had a drum set and had quit. So in the course of that dinner, my parents decided to buy their friend's drum set for $50, and so I'm driving back home from Yosemite with my parents, and they said, "Hey, by the way, we got you a drum set." And so I started taking lessons that summer, and then in seventh grade, I signed up for band. And the band teacher at my middle school, back then called junior high, was a really inspirational guy, got the kids really excited about music, and his name was Bob Sando, and he was a great teacher, and just I had, from taking concert band and jazz band with him, I was hooked on music and I knew that's kind of what I wanted to do. So after doing that, like around, I think the summer before my ninth grade, I went to a Stan Kenton camp. Stan Kenton was a great big band leader, did a lot of really progressive music too for his time. And one of my favorite drummers at the time was Peter Erskine. He was the drummer in Stan's band, and so I signed up to go to that camp. And he quit the band the week before that camp. So, and I wasn't crazy about the new drummer, so I spent much of that week learning from Stan's percussionist, Ramon Lopez, and that kind of got me started playing Latin percussion in addition to drum set. And so that kind of changed my path a little bit too. And then when I got to college, I studied at Cal State Northridge, and it had a great percussion department and music department. This was in 1979. And while studying there, I was definitely studying hand percussion, but that was mostly extracurricular for that time. In college, for my lessons there, I really got started on orchestral percussion. And even though it's not what I wanted to focus on, I'm so glad that I did learn and study orchestral percussion, because it just opened up so many more directions that I could go into. I mean, I still wanted to be a hand percussionist, playing in bands or records, but by having a diverse skill set, I learned early on that that increased the chance of me working and staying viable and being able to make a living. And that's really kind of how I got started. As far as getting hooked, when I graduated college, I was actually making a living as a percussionist. Was not getting rich, but I was making a living. I could pay my bills. And
where were you getting the work?
Well, I was playing in a lot of different jazz groups around LA, so there were those kind of gigs. I was also playing, doing school shows with this Chinese music ensemble and an Aztec music ensemble. We would go around and play assembly concerts for different high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools, and demonstrating Chinese instruments and Aztec instruments, and so that was actually paying a fair amount of my bills, and just anywhere, and casuals, weddings, bar mitzvahs, all that kind of stuff.
The typical musician world, right?
Yeah,
when you're starting out and you're just trying to take anything that you can.
That's right.
To get to play.
That's right. And actually, going back a little bit, like even starting to play professional stuff. One of the percussion teachers that was at the Stan Kenton camp I had met, he was playing with Bill Watrous, the great jazz trombonist in his band at the time. When I got down to L.A. and was going to school, I was starting to actually, obviously I was practicing really hard and learning what I knew I needed to learn to make a living. He heard me play at a Percussive Arts Society competition. He was getting ready to kind of back out of Bill's band and not focus on. He had other things he wanted to focus on than playing professionally at the time. So he recommended me to Bill Watrous's band. That was like the summer after my freshman year in college. So. I was even in college. I was actually starting to do some gigs that put me on a higher visibility level, just among the musician community in LA. So, I just played with anyone and everyone I possibly could, and made sure that when I went off to college, I put in the time to practice and learn what I was there to learn. That was my focus, and I worked very, very hard at it.
I'll bet you did, yeah, because you're really good, and I know that you're a good reader, which I've learned from on my side of the glass watching that those are the guys that really end up working the most, the people that can really read.
Absolutely, and it's funny. Even when I was studying the orchestral stuff in college, I was very hardcore about it, but I didn't feel like it was going to be a big part of my career. And boy, it has been, I never, I play timpani on Family Guy every weekly episode, basically. I'm principal percussion in the orchestra. And if I had never studied that stuff, I wouldn't have a gig like that. And that's the kind of gig too that show's gone on now for so long, that it's just a great gig to have some kind of consistency in my work,
Yeah. So. Yeah, that show is one of the few shows, especially for a half-hour animated show.
Yeah.
One of the very few shows anymore that actually does a new score every week, correct?
They do, and it's a full orchestra, anywhere from 35-piece to sometimes there's an 80-piece orchestra on a little TV episode for something like
That's
Family
amazing.
Guy. It is amazing.
And you have been involved in that since the beginning, correct?
From the very beginning, yeah. The first session, I think, was in 1998. We did that first season, and then it was the show got canceled, and then the fans... When the DVD came out of that season, the fans were so, crazy about the show, and the DVD sales were so good that Fox decided to bring the show back, and that's when it really took off. Mm-hmm. And Seth MacFarlane, he's just a great advocate for live music, and he loves musicians, and he loves doing it the right way. So. He gets the full credit for really insisting on having live music for his shows. And then that developed into American Dad. For a while, there was the spinoff of Family Guy called The Cleveland Show. Mm-hmm. And then this past year, he even has a new live action show called The Orville, which is kind of like a Star Trek type show with some humor. And that's a full orchestra. And it's... Boy, the music on these shows, it can be really, really challenging. And we go in there and we don't see the music till until we get there, and you better be able to read it.
Yeah.
When there's an 80-piece orchestra breathing down your neck, it's you got to be able to come through.
And that's true for all those musicians that get called. You don't get called for those kind of sessions if you're not a first-time reader.
Absolutely.
Or, a first-take reader, I should say.
Right. Absolutely. One of the first big movies I did was a movie called Mystery Alaska with Carter Burwell. And I was filling in for Mike Fisher, who's a great percussionist and great musician, great person, and did a lot for advancing percussion in ethnic percussion in movie scores. That score on Mystery Alaska featured berimbau, which is a Brazilian instrument. And Mike could not do all of the days of this movie, and so I was filling in for him on a couple days. And fortunately, I knew it was coming up, so I was able to practice berimbau a lot for a week or two beforehand. But I still didn't see the music until I got to the session. So I walk into this the studio. It was Todd A.O., and there's 80-piece orchestra, some of the top musicians in the world, is all these great musicians, and it just sounded amazing. The gig was 10 o'clock downbeat. I'm there early, of course, and I look at the music, and it was 22 pages of a fast 7/8 rhythm, and with a lot of variations, and the berimbau was constantly playing throughout. The orchestra would kind of come in and come out. The one element that was constantly playing was the berimbau. And at 10 o'clock, Carter Burwell got up on the podium and, asked everybody to be quiet and said, okay. He was very nervous about, having not having Mike Fisher there and having somebody fill in for him. So he said, everybody be quiet. I need to hear the berimbau to, see how the sound is. And it was like, at that moment, it was either going to work or not. And I played the berimbau, and he's like, played the part. And for, a few bars of it, he was like, okay, that sounds great. Let's go. And we did it. And that, between that movie and a few movies kind of similar where I had been given a chance, once I was able to go and improve myself, then I was kind of on the list of somebody they knew they could call, and the job would get done.
All right, so I have a question, because most people aren't going to know what that instrument is. Can you say the name? It's a
berimbau. It's spelled Berimbau. It's from I believe it's from Bahia, the northern part of Brazil, and it's a hunting bow with a gourd resonator. The gourd has a little string loop that goes through it, wraps around the bow and the string on the bow. So then you hold the instrument, the bow, you balance it on your pinky of your left hand by balancing it with the string that goes around the gourd and the string, and then you hit the string with a stick in your right hand, and then you have a coin or a stone in your left hand, and you push that against the string to raise it a half step. So, and then while you're balancing it and moving the stone on and off and hitting it with your right hand, you're also moving on and off your stomach. So it's a bit of a coordination dilemma.
Wow, that sounds like it would take some practice.
Yeah,
to learn
it really
that.
does.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't. It.
Not like you can just pick it up and just start banging.
Yeah,
on it,
when you see somebody do it, it kind of looks easy. It's not easy.
Yeah, I know you have all these cool, weird instruments. I've been over to your house and I've seen, you start pulling out all this weird stuff.
Oh yeah, it's endless.
I have weird stuff.
I have. After this interview, I have to be at home because I'm having 4 octaves of Balinese gongs being delivered to my house that are going to be on a truck with a pallet, and it'll be several hundred pounds of gongs that I'm excited about getting.
And is this a new purchase for you?
A new purchase, yeah, just because I'm constantly looking for new sounds and new, my niche in the LA studios is really I can do the orchestral thing, I can do a hand percussion thing, I can do percussion from pretty much anywhere around the world, and they know they can call me and do that. And I'm one of the few guys that can function very well in an orchestral section. But if there has to be some groove part or some hand percussion part, those guys for the most part don't do that very much. So I'm kind of like the guy that's in the section that can, if they need a little conga part or even a shaker, they're going to give it to me because that's, my forte. And those guys have other fortes, as great as they are. We each have our strengths, and that's kind of my strength.
Okay.
Even in the orchestral section. Although I often do orchestral gigs where all I do is timpani or whatever,
Yeah, sure. It's whatever they ask you to do.
Right.
Okay, so I did something that I usually don't do, and I kind of let you get off on some, other things, but I still want to go back to kind of the beginning when you were just starting out, and you already told us that you would go out and play with everybody, but so besides that, now you broke into the orchestral thing and the movie thing by getting to be a substitute for Mike Fisher. Well, but I know that there's been other things that you've done, maybe playing with bands and things like that. So let's back up to the early days and find out what you did besides the TV and film studio stuff.
As far as studio work, the early part of my career was much more focused on playing on records, because I really, at that time, I still saw myself as a, mostly, if not strictly, a hand percussionist. And, so for playing on records, that was kind of the better opportunity for me, and that was the things that record producers needed were hand percussion more than orchestral percussion.
Yeah, a lot of congas, bongos, shakers, cowbells, stuff like that, right?
So about a year after graduating college, I auditioned for a group called the New Christie Minstrels.
I remember them.
They had the hit, "I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing." I auditioned, got the gig, and then they said, "Okay, and it pays $150 a week." And I said, "I can't do that." I didn't see that as being a viable.
Well, you can't live on $150 a week.
I know, even back then, So I turned that down, and then about a month later, I got the call to go on the road with Maynard Ferguson. I thought, okay, that'll be awesome, and then they said, what it paid, and I just, things were, I was doing enough in town, starting to do some sessions, playing with some big name jazz people, that I felt like I was confident enough in my abilities at that point that I just felt like I had something else around the corner that was, going to be more the type of direction that I wanted to do. As much as I would have loved playing with Maynard Ferguson, and I had many friends in the band, and it was great, but I still turned it down. And then about a month later, I got a call to audition for Tina Marie, who had a big hit at the time, Lover Girl, and so I went and auditioned, and I got the gig, and I went ahead and did that tour that was 4 months of that, and I loved it. It was great. And she had me play on her next record, and that kind of helped really launch me into playing on other records as far as the LA studio scene. But the funny thing was, after doing that tour, I was working in town. I was gone for 4 months. I came back, and I hardly worked at all for a while, and it was a kind of an epiphany for me that I realized I either needed to do road gigs and I kind of focus on that, or if I really wanted to do studio work, I needed to stay in town and not just leave because then the work goes away and, I need to start from scratch.
Yeah, they stop calling you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what happened. So after I got back from that tour, I kind of struggled with that and realized, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to really stay in town. And then, slowly started to get back into the LA studio scene and started playing on, a few more records, played Tina's record, played on a record with Claire Fisher, who I had been working with his band a little bit. And then I started doing some records for Dr. Dre and NWA, and that kind of helped get me a little notoriety too. And some of the people I had worked with Tina, some of her engineer at the time, recommended me to some other producers, and it's just been it's a slow, long climb. I always expected earlier in my career there to be these giant leaps up, and it really has, for the most part, been a long, slow climb. I feel much more like the tortoise than the hare.
Yeah, right. And there was somebody else that you played with where you and I met, right? John Tesh?
Yep.
Yeah.
And he was
is
great.
Where we met, right?
I believe so, yeah. Well, no. Actually, we met... I met you playing on Charlie Bisharut's record, because that was before
right. Yeah.
I toured with Tesh, I believe.
Yeah.
I think it was,
So,
right?
So you knew Charlie.
I knew Charlie.
And Charlie called you in. And then
Right.
and then that's how you got started working with John.
Right.
Correct.
That's right. Yeah. And that was a great band. And once again, I started doing that because it was like weekends, 1 week in a month or something. And I thought, okay, I could do that. That won't impact my in-town work. And I had been starting to do some TV shows with a few different composers. And as John Tesh's band started traveling a little more, we would do like a 3-week tour or whatever. And I missed a couple TV things, and I lost my biggest TV account because of that gig. And that's when I thought, okay, I just have to not travel at all, basically.
Right. Yeah, you kept trying to make that work because you enjoyed the traveling.
Yeah, and I enjoyed
gigs.
the hang with the band. It's great, great guys, and we had a lot of fun. But when it started to negatively impact my in-town work, I just had to bow out.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Okay, so after that, so now you've decided to concentrate all on in-town work after that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what happened next? Who was the next big client that you got?
Well, I had been playing on a lot of records throughout the late 80s and 90s. I started to do some TV stuff, then that kind of died away because I had started to travel again. Then I thought, okay, staying in town. So the next really big thing, I mean, I was doing some stuff. I was getting by, not getting rich, but not that I'm rich now, but I was just getting by. And then to go step back a little bit, to go along with this, the other thing I've done throughout that time, even not just in college, but throughout all this period when I'm working, I'm also constantly trying to expand my skill set. I make a list every year, at the beginning of the year. People do New Year's resolutions. I call them goals. But I make a list of, if there's an instrument that I don't know how to play, an ethnic instrument or any kind of percussion instrument, I make a list of, okay, this year I'm going to spend a lot of time studying, tabla or doumbek or frame drums or, rick or, bowron, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So I'm constantly trying to expand my skill set. And basically what happened was I for lack of better explanation, I feel like my skill set finally got, expanded enough that I started to get more and more calls where they needed somebody with a diverse skill set. So the next really big break was I'd been doing records. I had also been doing a lot of jingles, and the jingles really helped a lot too. And they're great because they pay residuals, and so even when work's slow, a lot of times you go out to the mailbox and there's a pile of checks that might they might only be $60 each, but if there's 20 of them, that's $1,200 or whatever. So jingles were a big part of my income in the '90s as well. I decided, my wife Kim and I talked, and it felt like I'd been trying to get into the film thing for so long, it just was not going to happen. Let's move to Thousand Oaks because another thing that's important to me is balance in life, and I just thought Thousand Oaks would be like a really great place to live, and so raise our kids and all that stuff. So we moved there, and literally while we were in escrow with that house is when I got my first big film call, and it was with James Horner doing the music for Mighty Joe Young, and that was that score really featured African percussion, and it was Mike Fisher and myself and Bob Zamiti, and we did about a week or two of just 10-hour days of doing layering percussion. So that movie is the first big movie I had done, and that did change my life because really after I had the skill set to do that job, which is why I got the call. Mike recommended me, and really from that point on, that was the real start of Mystery Alaska. Was just later that year, really, but the first big one was Mighty Joe Young with James Horner, and that opened a door that has remained open ever since.
Well, with the movie stuff, it's all about being on the list, right?
Yeah, it is. But the thing is, for up-and-coming players, they shouldn't be too obsessed with getting on the list. They should be obsessed with developing a skill set that makes them worthy of being on the list. And what happens is when you do that, and you make an effort to play with as many people as you can and be nice to everybody and be a team player, when you do that, you will eventually get that call. I mean, it happens. And I've seen people that have gotten the call, their first opportunity, and if they're not ready for that gig, it's way more detrimental than to do a gig that you're not ready for than it would be to just wait a little longer and get your skill set more together and be ready for the call. Because the calls do come, but you got to be ready when they come.
Yeah, because if you go in there and you blow it, that's probably the last time you're ever going to get called, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the list, though, once you do get on that list, then every time they're going to put an orchestra together, they go down and they call the top people on the list first, right?
Right.
And then if somebody's not available, then somebody down below gets to move up a little bit, at least for that time.
Yeah.
And then they get their opportunity. And,
yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of times too, a good contractor will know all the players' strengths, right? Different players have different strengths. So like I said, my strength is being able to do ethnic percussion from, around the world, but also playing orchestral percussion. So like this past year, the movie Ferdinand it was animated about Ferdinand the Bull. John Powell, the great composer, did the score for that. He really is very conscious of timing and groove. So for that particular movie, I ended up being the principal percussionist for the orchestra section because I had done the hand percussion pre-records on the score, and also he wanted to continue some of that influence into the percussion section of the orchestra as well. So for a case like that, I ended up being principal percussion, even though often with other composers, I'm just in the percussion section, which is great too, and I'm more than happy to do whatever's needed. But different composers, different scores with different composers have different needs. So the list is flexible as far as who gets called for what role, but it's hopefully, always the goal is to have the right person for each spot on each score. It's not necessarily always the same on every score for even the same composer.
Would you say that now, in this time of your life, that is the principal part of your income is doing movies and television scoring?
Yes, I would say that. Although, one thing I'd have to add to that is if I were to looking back on my career, if I were to predict at any point in my career what I would be doing 5 years into the future, I don't think I ever would have been able to completely been accurate because things do change. Like, for instance, I always felt like, it's a very fluid and dynamic industry.
Yeah.
And things come and go and what's hot comes and goes and all that stuff. So, like, I used to always think, if the film scene really fell apart in LA, at least I'd always have jingles, because that's for a long time. That's been a big chunk of my work. And around 2007, 2008, the jingle scene just kind of almost completely died because they started using more licensed music, existing music. So, things change. Things change. And even when something's going really strongly, like the film thing for me right now, I still always try to have develop other opportunities. Like a few years ago, even though I wasn't playing on many jingles, I started writing for music for commercials, and that's been a good thing as well.
So when you write, you play piano or any other kind of, you play some kind of tonal instrument?
I play pitch percussion. I play, and also, in my composing setup, I have of course, a keyboard, and I can, read and play piano or any synth part. So I would program any of the pitch stuff. Mm-hmm. But of course, when they do call me to write a jingle for something, it's generally, they know that it's for the most part going to be percussion heavy. Yeah, because that's going to be my forte.
Yeah,
right.
Sure. So. Right. So would you say then, just curious on your perspective on, I call it the music business crash back around the year 2000 when Napster came out, mm-hmm. home studios took over and all that stuff. Has your work on records then diminished from that point on?
I'd say so, yeah. Yeah, because, there used to be so many different circles of studio musicians in LA. There were a lot of players that made their living just playing on records, and other circles of players that really just did jingles or just did TV or film or whatever. Now, many of those things have not necessarily died off completely, but slowed down enough that, you really have to be able to do it all and have a diverse skill set and diverse opportunities. I used to play on probably, maybe 40 records a year, maybe in the 90s, and if not more. And now it's like, I'd say way less than that.
Yeah, right.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Because
of course,
records for me are often, some of the most fun things to do.
Yeah.
Because it's a little more creative input, and that's what got us all hooked to wanting to be musicians early on, was hearing great records and wanting to be part of something like that.
Yeah. So, some of the composers that you who are the composers that you work with most often, or who are the most enjoyable, or just anything?
Well, some of my favorites. James Horner was such an incredible composer. He was really one of my all-time favorites, and it was really, his death was very tragic and affected a lot of musicians, sadly, too. And he had a lot more music in him. But so James Horner, I love James Newton Howard. I love John Powell. John Debney, we did The Greatest Showman on Earth this year, and he's an amazing composer. I led the ethnic percussion on Jungle Book with him, and who else? I mean, there are many. Jeff Beal, I love. There's a lot of, really. I mean, my work. Every job is so different and so diverse. That's what I love about doing. I really love doing completely different stuff, different kinds of scores each day, and just focusing on making that particular piece of music as good as it can be on that day. That's the diversity is what keeps me going.
Yeah.
So.
It's not easy being a musician, is it?
No, it's definitely not. And being freelance is not for everybody. You have to be ready for some ups and downs, and be when things are great, you have to save money and be willing to get through some hard times too.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, the downtimes are tough.
They are
because sometimes you can work and make a whole bunch of money, for a month or so, and then just all of a sudden there's nothing there for a few weeks or a month.
Yeah, or a year.
or it could be a year.
I mean, really, it's you, and even when you can make it financially or whatever, it's psychologically difficult too.
You start to wonder, well,
did I do something
wrong? Am I ever going to get called again?
Yeah, exactly.
So did I say something?
and what's gotten me through any of the hard times or slow times is just, my love for music and just focusing on, instead of thinking about not working, I just try to focus on doing good work and expanding my skill set and becoming a better musician and hopefully a better person too.
Oh, okay. And but you've been able to. I know you've raised family. You have 2 children. Yep. Sent them to college. Yeah. So it hasn't been all that bad for you.
No, I've been very.
You have
fortunate,
a nice house out here in Thousand Oaks.
Yep. I definitely feel very fortunate too. Absolutely. And another thing I think is really important, as far as staying sane in the slow times, ups and downs, is. It's really important to have balance in life. And musicians balance does not happen for musicians. We have to fight for it. So you have to make it a priority. And
well, I think that kind of goes along also not just being a musician, but being an independent contractor.
Absolutely.
It's like every day you feel like I should be doing something. Yeah. I should be... if I'm not working, if I don't actually have a project that I'm working on, then I should be promoting.
Right.
Or looking for work. Or something that has to do with making your career better.
That's true.
So you kind of never stop.
That's very true. That's actually very true. And although for me, instead of promoting myself, what I try to do and think about is, what can I do to make myself more valuable? To not only expanding my skill set, but is there a way, something I can do that will help the composers get what they need from me, whether it's, studying a new instrument or acquiring new instruments and new sounds, letting them know about it, that kind of thing. This is
a very unique thing to percussionists, though. I mean, I know guitar players go out and buy, most guitar players I know have like 40, 60, 100 guitars.
Yeah.
But percussionists, you don't just play one instrument. It's not like you just play piano or you just play guitar.
Absolutely.
You play all these diverse instruments, and each one of them, like you were describing the one instrument at the beginning of the interview, it's very difficult to play, and it's unique.
Absolutely. And percussionists have to, like, I actually keep all my stuff at a cartage company. It's like the warehouse at the cartage company sort of looks like the warehouse at the last scene of Indiana Jones, where they take the Ark of the Covenant into the government. That's kind of what the cartage company looks like, and it's wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling percussion instruments. And for me, especially, like I was saying, my niche is orchestral percussion and hand percussion, ethnic percussion from around the world. That's such a huge category. I mean, I literally have hundreds and hundreds of instruments. And as much work as I am fortunate to be doing, I also am buying more and more instruments every year. And I don't see that ending until I stop playing,
Yeah, because there's always something that you just found out about, not necessarily new, but something that you just found out about.
And even, I mean, I'm always looking for new sounds. A lot of my instruments are not even intended to be instruments. I have furniture, actually, that is an instrument to me that I'll be in a store, a furniture store, and I see something that I think, does that have a sound? And I'll start playing it, and it's like, oh my God, I have to buy this end table because it sounds amazing or something. And I literally have done that. I have a giant water tank cistern from a farm that sounds amazing, and I've used it on a lot of movies and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I've been over to your house. I've seen. So you had that all at the warehouse, but you still have hundreds of instruments at your house.
That's true too.
And you have a full set of percussion of timpani.
Yeah.
And this stuff takes up space.
Yep.
You got to have a lot of space for all this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, if even like timpani, I have 10 timpani at the warehouse and 4 at home, and at the warehouse, let's see, marimba, bass marimba, vibes, glockenspiel, steel marimba, xylophone. That's just the standard orchestral thing. And then since my work is a lot of, non-traditional percussion, I have dozens of weird tuned instruments from around the world, that some of which I know are one of a kind. And so if, I've had to make recordings for composers to hear some of these sounds so they can write for them, because they're not going to write for them if they don't even know what they are.
What they sound like.
Yeah.
So when you go off to do, say, an orchestral session for a movie, mm-hmm. They tell you ahead of time what instruments to bring?
Yes, they do. For the day before, I'll get an email with the list of what they're going to need. And for orchestral stuff, it's pretty much spelled out. But for ethnic stuff, it'll sometimes say specific things, or sometimes it'll just say low drum, or something that makes a whooshing sound or whatever. I mean, and if I have to talk to the composers, of course, they're busy working up to the last minute too. So we try not to, take their time unless we really need to. But if I need to talk to a composer about any particular sounds they might want, sometimes it's just categories. They'll say, send some metallic, effects or wood sounding stuff. Conversations help, because I'll send a range of things then that will hopefully fill the bill.
Now, when you first got here and we were talking before we started the interview, you said that you're into doing several different things. There's just other things that you're doing in your career that we haven't talked about?
Well, I love writing. I haven't done much producing, but I could see that at some point maybe happening more. It's really important for me to have some creative stuff happening that gives me the creative fulfillment that I need. Because sometimes on work, doing studio work, some of it's creatively fulfilling, and some of it really is just showing up and being a human computer that can read the part and play what's on the page. And that's a great challenge that I enjoy too. But as far as creative fulfillment, it's important to have some creative outlets too. Like, and that might be playing some little club for zero to little money to maybe even no money. But if it's creatively fulfilling, then I'll do that too. As long as I have time.
So going out and playing in clubs and stuff, anybody that you play with on a regular basis?
Well, sadly, that being said, because I've been busy enough in the studios, I have sadly had to cut back on that. So I used to do more of that now. But there's a singer up that lives up in near San Luis Obispo that did a few records with her. Her name's Inga Swearingen, and we've done some live performances. And she's really just a great jazz singer and super person, human being. And I enjoy doing some live stuff with her and her band. Do an occasional gig with the Dennis Dreeth Big Band. Done some live stuff actually, one of the most fun gigs of my career, in November, we did West Side Story with the LA Philharmonic, doing the film score live to the film. It's only the second time it had been done in LA. I did it the first time too at the Hollywood Bowl, which was about 6 years ago. Peter Erskine was on drums. I was on the Latin percussion as a guest, and I do some live stuff at the Hollywood Bowl a few years ago. Another one of my favorite gigs I've done there was with Herbie Hancock and his band. This is usually with the Bowl Orchestra or as an added musician when they have like a chamber orchestra. Some of the Vince Mendoza stuff, concerts we've done there have been really, really awesomely fulfilling. And the Herbie Hancock thing was with Vince Mendoza. Had like a chamber orchestra and big band in addition to Herbie's quartet. That particular one was fun for me because I was doing what I'm best at, which was hand percussion and a little bit of the orchestral percussion. Did mallets and marimba and vibes and then hand percussion. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do some musical theater. Occasionally do a show at the Pantages Theater in Hollywood. Like I subbed on Lion King, or other shows I've done there were Pippin, Beautiful, the Carole King musical, and a bunch of different ones. So once again, the variety is what keeps things interesting for me.
Yeah.
And keeps paying the bills too.
Yeah, well, that's important.
Yeah.
Keep money coming in, that's
Absolutely.
for sure. Yeah, so I remember when you did The Lion King, because you actually got me a pair of tickets to go to The Lion King, and I went with my daughter.
Oh, cool.
And it was, of course,
I forgot about that.
Great play.
It was amazing.
Really fun.
Yeah, that was an amazing
Loved it.
musical. Yeah.
And it's great that they still use, real musicians for those things.
Yeah, it
I
is.
know,
and, people here are so used to hearing pre-recorded music, even things that are represented as a live performance on Saturday Night Live or, whatever, different TV shows. A lot of times they're pre-recorded. So when people do hear an actual live performance, it's pretty impactful. There's nothing like hearing a live performance with a band or orchestra and actors on a show like that. Everybody's putting their best out, and there's such high energy because things can go wrong, and everybody's doing their best to make sure it goes great. And that's a thrill to hear as well as do,
Yeah, that's great. So do sometimes people send you, like for records, say, or jingles or something where it's not practical or the expense is too much to bring everybody into the studio, send you, say, a track, over the internet, and say, hey, can you put percussion on this? And you do it at your home.
Absolutely. That can happen. And so, any younger musician that's coming up, I think, is going to have to be fluent in Pro Tools as well as playing their instrument. It's more and more getting to be a necessary ingredient.
Well, I know with drummers and guitar players and stuff, I know almost all the drummers I know have a studio at their house.
Yeah.
They hardly ever actually go to somebody else's studio or a commercial studio to lay down their drum tracks. People just send them the stuff over the internet,
yeah,
the basic track, and say, "Hey, put some drums on this and send it back to me."
That's the trend, and it's not going away.
No,
and some of the best drummers in the world, they have the same thing. Like the top drummers here in LA, most of them have that set up too. And it's more for records than TV or film stuff. Mostly happens just in the scoring stages. But, But for records, it's definitely a necessary thing to do because the budget is just not there anymore.
Yeah, the budgets are so small.
With music streaming, so many of the revenue streams have not dwindled, they have disappeared.
Right.
And so the money's not there. So they can't pay $1,000 to have a cartage company come and deliver a setup at a studio that costs, $500 an hour. And, so that happens more and more with drummers and any instrument really. I think younger musicians need to be able to have a recording setup.
Yeah, because a lot of people who are producing records are paying for it themselves because there's no record company budget to do it. So they're paying for all this production themselves, hiring the musicians and all the other expenses that go along. And then once it's done, then they sell it to or maybe not.
Yeah.
Sell it to a record label to distribute.
Yeah. So really, we're all entrepreneurs too. We have to, even like, actually, my son went to USC Film School and he's a filmmaker and he spoke to one of the, he actually did an internship for one of the biggest directors in the business, and that director told him that for his latest movie he had to waive his upfront fee in order to get the movie done. So his total income from the movie was from the back end of the royalties
which could be
and stuff.
A year or
so even some of the biggest directors in the business have to change their business model of how they work. So it's crazy.
Do you think that the movie score business takes hits on a regular basis with people going to Poland or
that's been the biggest,
England or somewhere else?
That's been the biggest thing that's impacted the LA studio scene, and they're working hard on trying to stay competitive here in LA. It's more expensive to do it here because we have infrastructure that has to be maintained too, which is hard, and sadly we've lost a few of our big scoring stages. But I think adapting and staying viable for everyone is obviously really important.
So it kind of followed suit from what happened with the record business.
Right.
It used to be hundreds of studios that were mostly
hundreds.
Record studios.
Yeah.
And now there's a handful of those.
Yeah.
And so it's actually happening with the scoring stages too.
Absolutely.
Then,
huh? Yeah.
So compared to, say, 15 years ago, do you think that there's less movie scores being done in Los Angeles?
Yes, there is. But it seems like we may have reached a point where it's stabilizing, at least, if not turning around. Because there are things that they can get here that they cannot get anywhere else,
And that would be the musicians, right?
Yeah, that would be the musicians and some of the specialists, I think, especially. There's enough work here to make some of the great specialists be here, and that they can't get anywhere else, really.
Mm-hmm.
Do
you ever get asked to, say, fly to New York to do a session in New York or anything like that?
Pretty rarely, almost not at all. Because it's just for me. If somebody really wants me, my instruments are here. So they have to do it if they want me. I have to.
That's true.
Be here
Can't
in LA.
actually take. It's not like you just throw a guitar over your shoulder.
Yeah,
and go
I mean,
to New York
the cartage company, Royal Cartage, they're so great. They have 2 crews of workers and 5 or 6 trucks, and if they need to get 2 truckloads of my instruments to a studio, and I call them, and it's late notice, they can still do it, and taking 2 truckloads of instruments to New York or Nashville or
that would
cost
it's not a fortune.
It's not worth it,
No, it's not. No.
So
every time you do a session, there's a cartage bill, right? Mm-hmm. They have to pay for whatever instruments you need to bring, and that. So you have a cartage bill. Then every other percussionist that's in the percussion section is going to have a cartage bill.
No,
too, right?
That's not how it works. The way it works for film, well, any kind of thing where there's a percussion section, the timpanist, whoever's playing timpani, they send their timpani because everybody has a different way they set up their timpani, and it has to, you can really only play timpani that. It's important to have your own timpani that you know.
Okay.
Then whoever's principal percussion for the percussion section, they get the list the day before, and they send their gear, and all the other percussionists play instruments that the principal percussionist sends. So if you want to be a principal percussionist in LA, you have to own all of the instruments, So that's one reason why it's really hard to break in, because it takes a while to acquire all these instruments and let alone
expensive, right?
Let alone maintaining them. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, very expensive. I would think instruments like, say, not the pots and pans that you bring, but the timpani and the marimbas and the vibes and
and even
those kind of instruments cost thousands and thousands.
Absolutely,
of dollars.
And so does the hand percussion. I mean, I have an Egyptian tambourine. It's called a rick. That's worth $1,500.
Wow.
I mean, and I have many, many, many instruments, like a little instrument like that, that's still over $1,000 or whatever. So it really adds up, and especially if you really are focused on getting the best of each instrument, it's expensive and it takes time. But as players are coming up, you can start out with a cheaper version of that instrument, and it's not like you have to wait until you only buy the very best, but you buy instruments, and then when you get when you can afford a better one, you get a better one and get rid of the first one or whatever. So there's that too, but it still takes time and money.
yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Okay, so that cartage cost is a lot. Now, when that principal percussionist brings his percussion, does he get to charge a rental for all those instruments too?
Generally not. The only time we get to charge a rental is when an instrument is very esoteric. So, like today, these gongs I'm having delivered to my house, I'm going to have a welder make stands for them, and it's going to be this big thing. Something like that. Yeah, if I'm using these Balinese gongs, then there will be a rental bill. But also in acquiring these instruments, like if another percussionist needs Balinese gongs, they'll know once they know that I have them, then they'll be able to rent mine too. And these are things, that don't get used a lot, but the rental income helps pay for them. And of course, that's why I bought them, Mm-hmm. Besides the fact that I just wanted them.
So you think, well, percussionists, I guess, aren't much different than,
it's an illness,
than guitar players or engineers. We all love the gear that we work with, and we all want these, esoteric things, and, just dream over them, It's like, so for you, it's gongs and stuff like that.
Gongs and just weird drums and sounds.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, well, that's fun. So, okay, yeah. So your son is he's not doing what you're doing, but he's followed suit into the entertainment business anyway. Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that's contributing to his success is he, and our daughter too is going into the arts. She's an actress. They grew up in a freelance household, and they know there's challenges, but they also know that it's possible through hard work and perseverance and determination. So for a lot of people, that's, to not know where their next check is coming from, that's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
So
a lot
I
of people
think
don't work well with that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think they have that benefit going in, is that they know it's doable, but they also have seen the work that it takes to keep it going.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like I remember when I got married, and it was real hard for my in-laws to understand. Well, I remember she used to say to my wife back then, well, when's he going to get a real job?
Yeah.
Is people who have lived a life where dad left in the morning, came home at 5:00, dinner every night, same time.
Yep.
Paycheck is always the same. Never any question about where the money was coming from. But with people like us, we don't always know.
Yeah, that's true.
It's always funny on like applications for a loan or something. It's like, well, how much do you make a month? It doesn't really work that way.
Yeah. Yeah. The loan process is more complicated for freelancers, for sure. Yeah. I had a math teacher in high school that I was a very good student, great math student, and one of my math teachers begged me not to go into music, and I remember her telling me, "Brian, you can't eat a song."
Right.
But she didn't understand,
Yeah.
And actually as I was halfway through college, my folks were always very supportive, but my dad pulled me aside one time and tried to say, maybe how about if you go to orthodontic school, you can be an orthodontist, but just to have something to fall back on. And I understand the concern as a parent. I totally do. But what I told him was, if I'm going to do music, it has to be, it can't be 100%. It has to be 1,000%. And
it's true.
And that's basically what I did.
Yeah, you can't really split it up. I mean, if you were going to be an orthodontist, then maybe you would have played in a garage band on the weekends or something, and that would have been about it. You can't be a professional musician and do that.
It's really all or nothing. I feel.
Well, there's something interesting. If we're talking about the financial aspects of being in this business, something that's unique to you guys that are in the film business, and that I think all the other musicians and engineers and stuff like me are jealous of, and that's that you guys actually get residuals on the films, correct? Or some kind of special payments.
We do. They basically take, I think, 1% of revenue from secondary markets of the film, which is not box office, but just like video streaming or rentals or
DVD, it gets shown
DVD
on Netflix
sales.
And
right.
Stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. So they divide that up among the musicians, and that's really a great thing for keeping studio musicians viable here in LA, because that's a big part of our income.
And that gets paid. So so let's say you do a movie today, and then the movie comes out 6 months from now, and then later it goes off and does the secondary market like you described.
Right.
So then sometime down the road, months or a year later, you're going to get a check, and does that keep happening then?
It does keep happening. It really doesn't show up till about 2 years after a film is released, and then it kind of peaks there, and then kind of slowly dwindles off for that film. But each film just it might dwindle down to a few pennies or a few dollars per year. But as you build a catalog of films that you've worked on, it builds up to really helping out, and it's just a once a year royalty check.
Oh, okay.
It's not spread out over the year. It's once a year, and we've even, in order to keep that, the musicians union, this is great, they've lowered their upfront scales for like low budget films. There's a low budget scale, and there's a low budget scale, and even like for like super low budget indie projects, there's a very low scale where it really is very little capital outlay up front to get a score recorded. But then if a movie does well, they pay, they or if it doesn't pay well, they pay on the back end.
You're still going to get that 1%.
Right.
From that film.
But if they don't make any money, they don't pay any money. And if they make some, so they can, the scale for the lowest scale for like the very low budget films, it's literally like, I don't know, $50 an hour or something. It's very low. And they get great musicians for that. But then if it blows up and they make a lot of money, then they pay the royalty. And if nothing ever happens and they make zero, then they don't have to pay that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the other thing is that if you just trying to kind of give people a perspective on what musicians, how your financial life works. The other thing is if you're working a lot like you do, you also can get your health insurance through the union. Correct?
Yep.
And do they also automatically contribute to some kind of a retirement account for you?
There's a pension, and that's hopefully still going to be there when I retire.
Well, where would it go? It's your money, right?
Well, because the industry is struggling so much, the way most pension plans are set up is the reality is the current workers fund the current retirees.
Oh, okay.
So, it's our pension fund. Sadly, is it's not in critical status, but it's getting closer to that. And
why is that?
Because as the amount of work has gone down, there's less money going into the pension fund. But all these players that have, had great long careers when things were really busy, they're retired now, and so there's more money going out than is coming in. So, which of course is only sustainable for a short time. So, they've had to lower the amount that the pension pays out, and all that kind of stuff. So it's still going to be there, but it's not going to be what was originally what the formula would have been for me if things hadn't changed. The formula will be less than what it used to be. Mm-hmm. Used to be for every $100 that contribution that goes into a musician's pension fund used to equal $4.65 per month per musician, and now that's down to $1 or at 55 or $2 at 65. So it's, so once again, us musicians also have to diversify our revenue streams and make sure that we make our own investments and take care of ourselves.
You can't count on it to completely.
It's going to help. It definitely is going to help. And I'm a strong supporter of our union, but we also have to take care of ourselves as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Our health insurance, actually, for many years we were in the motion picture plan. So if you do many films, you get this great insurance for free. But sadly, they kicked the musicians out of that a few years back. So now we have a plan that we have contributions that go in from our work that are pay into the plan.
And that's through the musicians union.
Yeah, yeah. But we generally have to pitch in some too.
Yeah.
But it definitely helps.
And future plans, just keep on keeping on and doing what you're doing?
Absolutely. I love the diversity and variety of work I do, so it's keeping me interested still. I don't ever really want to retire, but I do want to slow down. So when that time comes, I'll just do less work, hopefully, until hopefully not overstay my welcome, though.
Yeah. I think you got a few more years in you.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Okay. Well, I can't think of anything more to ask you, Brian, so I appreciate you driving all the way over here. A couple miles from
it's
from
always
your house
great
to
see
mine.
My friend.
Yeah,
Ross.
it's nice to see you too. So we're going to sign off now, and thanks for being another person, that's contributed to this podcast. Hopefully the aspiring percussionists out there will find this interesting and
My
helpful
pleasure.
to them. And anybody else that just likes music and wants to know a little bit more about it. So thank you, Brian, and we'll be signing off.
Thank you very much.
We are currently looking for sponsors for the Rossaround Backstage podcasts so that we can continue to bring you interesting stories like the one that you just heard. I can be reached through Facebook or email me at rosspallone@me.com. Thank you for listening.